Okay, so as folks are trickling in, I am so excited to be here with Brodie Crellin today. They are the author of A Sense of Occasion, a novel that has debuted here. It has debuted in London, where they currently are. Brodie, I didn't even realize you are currently in London. I knew you were based in London, but I didn't know if you were traveling or anything with the time
Oh no.
difference or touring. No, you're in the UK. Okay, cool.
Mhm.
So yes, they're in the UK right now. They have a fabulous debut novel, A Sense of Occasion. They're also an editor at Granta Magazine, and have been for the past 4 years, which I'm sure some of you may have heard as we were preambling a bit. Brodie, you are here to talk with me today, not just about this book, and its existence in the world, but also just about your literary influences, your kind of
Mm.
like North Stars. We're going to talk about the Gilmore Girls, which I think is very germane to this project, in ways that people might not realize, but I got it. I'm a huge Gilmore Girls fan too, along with you. And just look at this cross-cultural, reception, everything that's been going on. Congratulations, by the way. You have
Thank you.
some really amazing accolades for this book coming out. We were just talking about how the one and only Merv Emery has called this book truly profound. And she loves how it explores the cost of performing one's sexuality in public and private. She read it in a day. Merv Emery read this in a day. And Chris Kraus, we all know who Chris Kraus is, also loved this novel. It's transgressive, it's stylish, it's sexy, it is tender, it's a realist family drama. Um, Brodie, can you, now that I have given that spiel, can you go ahead and tell me just a little bit about like why and how you came to write this particular book and who your literary North Stars are?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I started writing the book in 2022, and I knew that I wanted to write a novel about a family. I wasn't entirely sure what sort of um, form it was going to take necessarily, but I don't I guess I read sort of a lot of family novels sort of like in that area, and knew that like I would need to sort of like inject an event into the story, because I feel like there's something about family novels is they're so transitional, and what like in order to sort of like move through into a different space, there's always change within the family, and often that is always like a funeral or a wedding. And I was also understood my parameters. I was aware that I wasn't going to be able to create something that was sort of like sprawling and over a long time frame. So I think keeping it close to an event was something that I knew that I wanted to like structurally begin with. And I don't know, I guess I wanted to explore grief. I wanted to think about relationships. I think
Mm.
relationships are the reason why I write really. I like thinking about characters in pairs. I like thinking about the way they triangulate, the way they operate in quads. I think that just understanding the dynamics between people and then finding a way to express that on the page is the reason why I sort of spend time in Google Docs. Um, so yeah, I guess these characters sort of came to me fully formed, specifically like Patch and Jude, and then it was almost just thinking about who's going to be orbiting these two characters, and what it is that's going to push them apart and bring them back together. So that's sort of where I began. And in terms of like North Stars, I read a lot of I guess sort of like mid 20th century
Mm.
stuff. I really care about Carson McCullers. I think that
Mm.
it was very,
Oh,
very
wow.
cool book for me. And I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
Frankie in Patch and sort of the journey that she goes on. And I guess also Cassandra at the Wedding, Dorothy
Mm.
Baker, Jean Stafford, like the Mountain Lion.
Mm.
And
Thank
then
you.
in the British side, authors like Ivy Compton Burnett, um,
Mm.
more sort of like early 20th century. So I guess those are the sort of writers that I was thinking about um, when I was considering, like when I was like trying to feel like when I was feeling get excited about the sort of story I wanted to tell.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so those sorts of writers, I think, was where I was beginning.
And I'm sorry, you faded just a little bit. You said member of the wedding, right? When you said
Yeah.
person. Yeah, I absolutely see that in your book. And thank you so much for the Jean Stafford shout out. She
Oh,
does
yeah.
not get enough love. Oh my lord. Yeah.
It's an incredible book, and her short stories are
Yes.
amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
that I mean that novel is dealing with the incest plots in such an interesting way. And I guess that was the relationship between those siblings and how spiky and violent that sort of entangled they were was definitely how I started conceptualizing families and particularly these bonds between like very close members within a family, like siblings or cousins, or even like parent and a child, and how they can get so like aggressive, but there's not necessarily like an outlet. And it's just sort of like thinking through how that energy like metabolizes within a relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's the you know, there's so much there's I feel like on coming on the American side of things, there's so much to sort of like digest when it comes to the kind of familial spikiness, especially like the incest taboo. I am, for whatever reason, I'm a Midwesterner. Well, I know I'm a Midwesterner. I was born there, but for whatever reason, I've really always been attracted to Southern literature.
Mm,
And, you know, when I think of like books that are kind of tackling like that familial spikiness and how it's interlaced with, like class, right? Class, race, gender, all these different kind of um I guess identitarian staples you could explore through the lens of family. The way you tackle, I love that the word for it, that spikiness is different from the way that like Faulkner would, or of course like Toni Morrison. When we're talking about like how these relationships become distorted, broken, repaired, and like what that looks like for the family. Those books do explore those topics of incest, certainly,
mm,
but they explore it differently. So that's what I went to like right away, right? But then when you're mentioning all these mid-century writers, I'm like, oh, well, yes, of course. There's also even beyond Salinger, who
mm,
whatever. Like I don't mean to dismiss him out of hand, but I think there's more exploration of these kind of interfamilial dynamics that predate like the family systems novel. What came to my mind right away, is that the Madeline Cash book, Lost Lambs, and how she was kind of wanting to evoke these like 90s, like late postmodernist, like doodly novels. Like, I mean, I love the corrections. I do. I love a lot of Jonathan Franzen books. Some I hate, but some I love. And the corrections is really one of that I love. I think that, when you're talking about interdependence and family and the American middle class and how these sort of challenging dynamics could come into play and these taboo dynamics, right? Like incest and like different distortions of love. Yeah, there's totally a place for that. And there's totally a place like you've contextualized your book so effectively for me because I was like all these readers who was like, I'm scandalized by the cousins, and I
yeah.
think, oops, there's absolutely more to it. I want to actually though, thank you for saying that, and I want to jump back a little bit, um, like way back to the very beginning of your book because there is the inciting incident. Of course, this book is an exploration of grief, absolutely, and that I think is so much more important than like whatever hashing apart the other dynamics in it. We talk about or we learn that the matriarch of the family has passed away. The very beginning, like it's Mary's death, and Jude, a playwright in London, is she's going to come home and she's going to like make this kind of big announcement with her presence, right?
Mm.
And there there's this a kind of like trickiness, I think, to how she's playing that and how Patch, her cousin, and Robin, the gay ex-husband of Mary, are playing it too.
Never,
I'm thinking,
never married.
yes.
Never married.
Oh, I'm sorry, never married, partner, never married, like
Never
partner.
married.
Thank you. Nobody's married. I appreciate the important point. But I'm thinking, Brody, of a conversation Patch and Robin have early on. There's a line that I was like, it really struck me. The Patch talks about how all kids are conservative,
Right.
Patrick, right? And like they're talking about because Robin he has his own kind of like sexual life. He has his own sexual awakening, and that quote made me think of something you said, which is how this book is for anyone who loves Gilmore Girls, but
Mhm.
wish that it was like a little meaner. There was more sex in it, and I thought those two fit together like so beautifully. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit more about like the conservatism, right, of the conformity of being a high schooler, being young, and maybe how that kind of like transgressing that conformity, or how like love looks more complicated than that. And we realize that as we grow up. That message was so very beautifully telegraphed in your book. I wanted to hear more from you about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is such like a modernizing impulse within schools, and within like social environments, in between children. I think there is sort of this impulse to fit in and to look alike, and have families that sort of emulate one another. And I think for
Mm,
Patch as a child, having these parents who are sometimes together but living separately, and both very much coded to other adults as gay, whether
mm,
that's because Robin is a flamboyant, very openly like homosexual man, and Mary in her way is a butch lesbian art teacher, and both of them are sort of muddling through in what could appear to like some eyes as like a straight passing relationship, but to
mm,
others it's really not. I think that Patch definitely always feels this sort of like stigma attached to the way that she has sort of been her family has been viewed. And I don't know how um much Robin really sort of understands where Patch is coming from, because he hasn't necessarily like always been there, like in the points. I think throughout the book you sort of realize, and Robin realizes towards the end, that he hasn't necessarily been like the most present parent.
mm,
And I think you do come to realize that Mary, like for all of her faults and rudeness and bluntness, has been the parent that was, actually like providing the scaffolding for Patch's childhood, even if it wasn't always done in the softest way. And I think what Patch is like trying to express there is just that, wouldn't it be so nice to like fit in? And I think she's still not quite a grown up. Like she's 27 years old, but she's still on this journey to sort of understanding like who she is, how she fits in. Like I wouldn't even say that we could class Patch's sexuality at the moment. Like she'll
mm.
have sex with whoever's keen because she doesn't have any self-esteem. So I think that she's just a very like unformed, unjoined in like the McCullers sort of like framing way of being. Um, and I think if we're sort of like transplanting that onto like the Gilmore Girls universe, I think Rory too, like she is a child that just wants to be normal, and
Mhm,
fit in and have the right kind of school uniform. And I think that much like Patch, who like adores Robin, and loves the sort of like excitement that he brings to her life. Like obviously Rory adores Lorelai, but I think there's still this sort of like, oh, I kind of wish that everything like looked a little bit more normal. Um,
mm,
in terms of like, I don't know. I loved watching. I actually am gonna put my hands up here. Like with Gilmore Girls, I can't get past her like dropping out of Yale, because it just
mm.
those later seasons I can't cope with.
Yeah,
That's all because Lorelai and Rory aren't speaking. But I think that like the magic of that show is when like this parent and child are like just having this relationship, which really just transcends what we sort of understand that dynamic to be. And it just becomes this very social, very verbal, and just sort of just dynamic intimacy, which
yes.
at their best, I think Patch and Robin do manage to sort of do. And I think that they don't
Yes.
really fit into like this child parent model at all. Like he overshares in the same way that Lorelai obviously does too. And I don't think, I mean, then neither of them are like model parents, but they're both really interesting. So I guess I don't know. I think
Yes.
maybe that was where I was going with that. But yeah, I think that they obviously just have a lot more sex than Gilmore Girls, because it's all a little bit like coffees and like muffins.
Right. Yeah, it's that wherever they could be going to Luke's diner,
Yeah,
instead they're cottaging.
yeah,
Um, but I think I mean, I love what you said though, Brody, about the like essentially comparing Patch to Rory, like sexually unformed, right? And I think justifiably so, because she is young and she has desire, but it's also like confused because she's so young, um, and does not have very high self-esteem, but she's keen to fit in, right? And I think that you have a book where the death of the matriarch of the family, right? I love how you're kind of there's a subversion there because it's like we don't think of the butch lesbian art teacher as the matriarch of a small town English, family, but she is, right? And I think that her death incites a um I mean, like an emotional, I guess, like some internal emotional reckoning, but also closeness. It
Mhm.
brings these people together, and they're figuring out how to grieve.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I'm wondering how did you intend this book as an exploration of grief?
I think that I really wanted to explore the quotidian aspects of grief,
Mm,
like the banalities and how they manifest so often, like in my experience, is just like pure strangeness and what you sort of
hmm
expect to sort of unfold like in the wake of death or grief just is really, in my experience, never really what you've expected. And I think that I wanted to sort of tap into that um non-verbal, like, aspect of it, where you're sort of feeling things that you're maybe not able to express or articulate or aren't able to find the right form for, even if it's just something as banal as, like, being, like, extremely hungry or, like, needing to do something and then not being able to find, like, a space to do that. And I think that the way that grief unfolds in this book is it's, like, it obviously is extremely repressed, like, nobody is talking
yeah.
about it. Like, Mary comes to us as readers through these, like, flashbacks and these, like, moments where I don't know, it's not like the characters are speaking about them necessarily, it's just what the reader has access. But I think it's
Right.
because they're not able in this moment. It's almost like they're sort of in shock, and it's like that moment of
Mm,
grief that I wanted to explore. It's not this aftermath where you're mourning and having to process, because this is sort of this very sort of like controlled, contained moment where you just have to like react. And I think that it's
mhm,
in that moment where it's quite interesting to just look at like how humans behave. And I think so much of it is to do with maybe like how they perform, or like for Jude, it's she thinks that there's a role that she needs to play, and she thinks that she
mm,
needs um exhibit a certain type of like caretaking. I think that's how she's going
mm,
to enter into this moment. I think Robin has like some delusions about the sort of parenting that he might achieve, and I think that all of that sort of like catalyzes in a strange way, like erotically. I think that there's like a combustion.
yeah.
And I think that
Yeah.
what I was doing with the sex and the grief and how they're so entangled is I was looking for a way to sort of show how it it's the energy has to come out somewhere. And like whether that's sort of erotic
Oh, right.
or I don't know, whatever form that's going to take, whether it's like aggression or anger or like there's
Right.
emotion. And for these people, it's sort of it comes out through sex. I think they're extremely like linked, sex and death. And in this moment, that's sort of what's going on for this family. And I think in terms of the grief, that's where I wanted to get to. I just wanted to explore the strangeness of it and how
Mm,
it's what you expect. And it's just yeah, that moment of feeling shocked, unsure, before we move into grief, was the sort of area I wanted to think about more closely.
and it makes so much sense, right? Like, I think that there I have a question here, right, about the quote unquote Britishness of your book. It's been described as a very British book, and whether you see it as deliberately transgressing social norms, but I think that's also like you mentioned, whoa, I really got some feedback from people being like, I am scandalized by there's
Yes.
incest in this book, there's some and there's intense, but I think, you know, the moralizing around this is what's tricky, and it's not something I have an answer for. this book is like accurate reportage. It's Eros and Thanatos. It's exactly how humans are, because it is one way humans absolutely could be, right?
Mm.
And I think that it makes sense as an artifact of like this is how grief could be processed. The moralizing around the sex, right? And this is something both I think both you in your work, for obviously, and I as well have like interest in exploring. Because I read where one reviewer wrote about how each character in this book has different experience of queerness, right? And we could call it, kind of a queer novel in that sense. Um, I am often kind of writing, at least lately, about like sexuality as something that can predetermine one's like identity in certain social spaces. Because if you are kind of saying like, oh, hey, whatever, like I'm trans, I'm queer, I'm lesbian, da 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 da. Now we're at a place discursively in American culture where that just if you say that, that precedes you. And you have all this stuff that comes and sticks to you, right? And it's hard to step out of a certain type of conversation, right? And I think what I love so much about your book is that it was like, you know, whatever reaction the book is essentially saying, whatever reaction you have to me, I am just going to exist as I am. Like this is how these people are coping with their grief. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about well, yeah, I'm curious, Brodie, if you could talk about your perception maybe of like this is a queer book or not, and then whether you feel how I've felt, maybe you feel differently about like certain identity labels preceding one's work or one's ideas.
Yeah, I can try and answer that question. I think that there are like a couple of different answers to it. While I do think this is a queer novel in that the
Mhm,
characters definitely engage in some queer activities, um, I think for Jude and Patch, especially, I actually wanted their sexuality to be like the least interesting thing about them. I don't
mhm,
think that the way they move through like this novelistic universe, I don't think their sexuality impedes or like I don't think any of their sort of like identity like hinges on that. And I think what I wanted to be like more important within this book and the sort of thing that we were focusing on was their like relationship to one another, and their
mhm,
relationship with the characters in the book. I think I really wanted this to be like a relational story rather than one of like, I don't know, like queer becoming, queer suffering, queer um, complexities. I think that at the same time, I have had like a very queer life. My parents are
mhm,
gay and
mhm,
have always sort of like moved through the world in as a queer person under a straight lens. So I think that my characters were always going to be gay in some way.
mhm,
Um, and I think that was important to me. And there's definitely the thread with Robin and Mary where their queerness has a huge impact on how they're able to live publicly and privately. And that was something that I wanted to integrate. And especially like for a first novel, it would have felt strange for me to not have any sort of like discursive moment um, touching on that. But no, I think that for that sort of more like historical strand with Mary and Robin, and even I suppose for Mary in the present towards like the end of her life, that mattered to me. But otherwise, I think, yeah, I wanted within this space, like within this book, to create representation of these characters where those vectors weren't the sort of the angles that we were sort of being forced to look down at them from.
totally. It's almost there are some stories that I have, been kind of pitched to where it's like, hey, like, please read this, new novels, whatever, where it's almost like, okay, you have to know that this character has this identity. and that is the precondition for this story. Like, this story doesn't get told unless this character, you know, all the, like, you know, whatever trans information, all the queer, and I think that what I really, really loved about your novel, which is, if you are just joining now, it's a sense of occasion. Brodie Crellin's debut novel, is that that was not the case, right? It was like, that is secondary. These behaviors are secondary, or rather behaviors, these identities are secondary to these behaviors, which are just human expressions of grief in this case.
Exactly.
And
And I think, maybe also, I mean, I think I take a lot of it for granted in some senses, in terms of the sort of maybe some of the shorthand or some of the ways that I put these characters into relation to one another. And I think that I'm maybe asking a reader to like play catch up. I'm not explaining.
mm,
And I'm not providing that like sort of additional context. I'm sort of coming at this almost like from a Jude Impact's point of view, like presuming a certain level of knowledge
sure.
and
I
understanding.
Do you think that's the part of, like, you're having an experience right now where your book has debuted kind of cross culturally, right? Two English speaking cultures, some different mores. Are you seeing a difference in how it's been received in the UK versus the US?
A bit. I
Yeah.
um, I think that in the US, there's definitely more of an emphasis on this being like a slight emphasis, not more necessarily, because it is a little bit here too, on it being a taboo buster and like
Hmm.
it being sexy or I think what did you raunchy? Well,
It
I
was, yeah, it was how it was marketed to me too. It was like
I don't
transgressive, sexy, stylish, very British.
I don't think it's a sexy book. Like I I think there's sex in it, but I wouldn't call it
Certainly.
a sexy novel. I think that it's like a bringing a social realist lens to sex, but I don't think that necessarily means it's sexy at all. I think it's just paying attention and a lot of observation and detail in the same way that we would, I don't know, like maybe describe having dinner. I think it's
Sure.
describing dinner, I mean, sex in the same sort of vernacular and yeah, detail as what we're all eating.
It's
Um,
like the discreet charm of the bourgeoisie, I guess, would be the absurdist application of the social realist lens, where it's like,
Mhm.
we're all eating dinner, but actually they're all taking a shit as a group. I don't
Yeah,
know if that's a if that's a less a touchstone for this book, I think, than for, like, the kind of the subversive piece. But yes, I totally understand what you're saying, and I think I actually wanna dig in more into the cultural difference, I think, than maybe,
yeah.
like, "Brody,
I think
defend these choices." Yeah.
culturally, I mean, it's been pretty similar. I think that in the UK as well, it has, yeah, been viewed as like a comedy of manners, um, bad manners, and yeah, I think that's been pretty similar both sides. Um, I know I think that I think both sides have found elements of the book tricky. Um, so,
Yeah. I think this is what came to mind. I don't know, folks, if you in the chat have read this. Ooh, so sorry. Or Brody, if you,
yeah,
yeah, the old Jack Halberstam, The Queer Art of Failure, and I'm bringing up Jack Halberstam's work here right now because I think that, um, Jack. Actually, I'm not sure the pronouns right now. Who do they them? They are they wrote The Queer Art of Failure as a way of kind of addressing the, like, I guess, like, how do we talk about, like, queerness, or like what is queer theory, and what is what, I guess, like, what precondition for like queerness, I guess, is identity or in literature. And I think that the failure queerness as a failure of identifying traditional mores or just traditional behaviors as something that fails for oneself, right? Or
mm,
failing out of the kind of patriarchal nuclear family, right? Failing out of the kind of gray flannel suit life that, I guess our baby boomer generation was rebelling against. Um, Jack kind of took it, and explored how that would marry up with corporeal style and like being gay or being lesbian. And so the queer art of failure, it really was popping into my brain as I was reading your book, because it was like, if I pull back from all my own like layers of whatever, and I think I know that we are really inclined to moralize, to go way too hard in the direction of like sex, 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 and then to go way too hard in the direction of moralize, moralize, moralize. It's feels very chaotic all the time. Um, but I thought of the queer art of failure as I was reading your book, not because it was like your book is like queer sex, sexy queer sex, 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 but because it's like, hey, I'm sure that you being the reader, think there are ways a family should act or should handle their grief, or ways a family should look. And you can fail out of that. You can kind of be like, actually, this isn't how my family looks. And that's what Patch is grappling with. And that's such a relatable thing to grapple with.
Mm. No, I think that all novels that depict a family will eventually have some rupture, and
Yes.
within a story, it's the sort of it's just about like what kind of device do you use to explore that rupture. I'm interested in sex. I think that it's a really sort of like capacious and exploratory like arena to think through how we behave like socially and professionally, and like what emerges like in this sexual space. Like that's something that I like care about and wanted to think about more with the book. And just because these characters often use the sexual arena to work through intimacies, problems, issues in themselves, issues with one another, that's, I think, the tendency to like moralize about this book is the wrong impulse. I think that within this dynamic between Patch and Jude, for example, who sleep together, I it's not about there being a romantic attraction. It's about there being
Mm,
a problem in the relationship, and one that is
mm,
not communicable, one that they haven't managed to work through, one that's like it's about two people who are like coming to the very edge of their relationship, which is what we see in so many stories. I think it's the same story that we see between Joe and Amy in Little Women. It's this story that we see
yes.
between Judith and Cassandra in Cassandra at the Wedding. And obviously, those writers, very different time, very different intentions. They haven't chosen to explore what would happen if these two sisters, or yeah, in both situations, sisters, are connected separately. I didn't write this scene because I thought, oh, wow, like what would happen if these two cousins had sex? I think what I'm thinking about is a relationship, and particularly within families where there are so few exit strategies and so few ways to like remove yourself from a family. Because I think there are so many like um, impulses and conventions that make us feel like we have to stay within them. What would it take for there to be a rupture? And
Mm,
what lengths would they go to repair it? I think I'm thinking here about the family form, how we understand
mm,
it. And it becomes sort of like it's a mechanism, like that's what the sex is
yes.
here. And whether that's sort of to it, like even with like Robin and Mary, who have this like more conventional relationship, age gap aside, man and a woman, like that, like with their sex, which is very verbal, and it's about fantasy. It's sort of about how far can we like push this delusion of what you and I can create together in terms of a family. And I guess that's what I care so much about, and that in terms of sex, and like why I think it's such a fertile and like rich scene to like just think through intimacy in all its various forms. So I think that people who come to the book with a sort of like a moralizing tendency are missing the point. It's not necessarily all supposed to be taken literally. Like not all of this, even though I'm coming at it in a very realist form, it's about thinking like what sex is, what it does, and about like what a family is, what a family can hold, and just sort of like the limitations and the possibilities within those areas.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I'm wondering, Brody, do you see social realism and the social realist novel, the granularly observed novel, and making a comeback? Like, are you seeing the kind of like
Mm.
or psychological realism?
Yeah,
happening more and more often in ways that excite you?
I mean, I love social realism. I love Henry James,
Mm.
and George Eliot. I spend a lot of time reading books like and I think I do see it to some extent. Like I have just read Leon Fishman's book that will be out next year, and you can see the influence of like Henry James in those sentences. And obviously Sally Rooney is a huge fan of realism.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Yeah.
but as much as I say that, like I don't read a huge amount of realism in
Mm.
I mean, I'm just looking at my bookshelf. One of my
Yeah.
very good friends and incredible
Yes.
novelist, she doesn't have a publisher in the US actually, but
Ah.
Maria Armstrong, and her book is called To Rest Our Minds and Bodies. And that is the
Mhm.
same sort of like granular realism that I think can achieve so much. Like we have the details of every single thing she looks at in Sainsbury's, which is our like big supermarket here. And yeah, I think it is making a comeback, but it's also a challenge, isn't it? Because I think
Yes.
we have, I mean, there have been so many like brilliant iterations of books that, um, like Sophie Kemp and
Mm.
I don't know, Sheila Hetty, that are sort of like playing with what the
Oh,
novel
yes.
do. And yeah, I don't know. I think, I mean, I really love the novel form. I love the like traditional novel, and I think that it's um reinventing that as a form isn't necessarily something that I plan to do. I'm happy to work within things. And if you have maybe that other people also find excitement within the character and form, I seem to consider that.
And being exercise to order the noise outside with me now. I'm going to fix that problem. Completely. Um, yeah, I think that I am absolutely there with you in loving Henry James and George Eliot and the like the thing I think that needs, and of course as Sheila Hetty as well, but I think that the thing that like I've been observing um in my weird life online and also just like generally in like kind of American publishing is just a lot of hand wringing and doom and gloom around lack of a reader, like dwindling readership, like is like our younger readers reading, um an assumption that like men aren't writing at all or reading, which is patently false. um just kind of a lot of doomsaying, and I think that I like as a devotee of the social novel as well, I think that there's something that these stories do, and that I think your novel does as well, that like takes the pressure out of the strictures of a social situation. It functions as a pressure release valve, right? So if you come to a sense of occasion and you read this book, whether you're like you immediately grok it, whether you're like, oh no, I'm scandalous, whether you're like, oh yes, like this is thrilling. No matter what is happening, you're experiencing a form of catharsis where you're being invited into a reality that is like ulterior and therefore like releases a sense of pressure of how you feel you need to function in the reality you're living in, right? So it's kind of like, oh, like this is one way people are. Like this is one way people could process things. This is one way people exist in the world or could exist in the world. Like what I love about social realism is it's technically a counterfactual, I guess, because it's fiction, supposedly, but it does not run counter to reality because it is observing social reality, and it's allowing the reader to be like, oh, phew, like there are different ways to be in the world, and I don't feel so like bound up. When I think of like obviously Jane Austen, the like master social realist who is allowing young women on the marriage mart to just like fashionably read a novel but also experience a little bit of social commentary. I think of yeah, I mean I also think of books like yours, and I think of books that are kind of like using that observational lens in order to give their readers some relief. And I'm wondering if you see your book as sitting in that kind of constellation of being like, hey, like you can just kind of you can read this book and you can feel that there people are different ways. And in fact, you might not be alone. Now I'm getting into the new sincerity territory, but it's a worthy territory, I think. I don't
I think behind or sort of simultaneously and in tune with the humor, because I think it is still a comedy. I think that all of those moments of like warmth and humor, and which are often also spiky and cruel. I think that it is like it's an attempt to like connect these characters for all of their like misfirings of care and sort of accidental cruelties, intended cruelties, like they are often trying to connect and become closer together. And we're witness to that. And I think that because this is sort of like a multi-voice novel, like in the third person, we're sort of allowed. I mean, I'm inviting people to empathize, even when they're
absolutely.
at their cruelest and
Mm,
um, inflicting harm on one another. I'm hoping, trying to make it clear that they also love one another, um,
mhm,
and they they are making mistakes and they are not necessarily behaving well. But I'm hopefully like also giving room to understand like why they're behaving like that, or
mm.
like even with Jude, like I think some of her behavior is unforgivable. But then also look at her parents. And
Right.
she's she's got her own things to deal with, and yeah, I'm sure living with Patch for that time wasn't that fun. So I think there's definitely like an intention to just allow people to connect, and I mean I definitely write to connect with others. I think
Yeah.
maybe yeah, I don't know. I think and there is a lot of sincerity within the sarcasm in the satire and the spikiness.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why I come back to the Gilmore Girls comparison with you too, because it's like that the back and forth of your dialogue. The dialogue is absolutely one of my favorite parts of your book. Your dialogue is
Yeah.
fantastic. I could just like sink into that I was like, oof, this is so fun to read. And as a, Amy Sherman Palladino show lover, right? That it's so much of that kind of like snappy. And yes, you're right. It can be spiky because like you have Lorelai and Rory kind of when they're
Emily.
vibing. Sorry.
And Emily.
Oh my god, and yes,
Yeah.
Emily joins in too,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then, Richard finds out he's an Autumn, right? And it's like I think it's like they could all yes, they could all kind of like be funny together and be close and they love each other so deeply and they're also like athwart each other in a lot of different ways. And so when that humor and that rapid fire wit turns spiky and turns mean, yeah, it can be devastating. But the love isn't gone from that.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think also we see these characters mostly interacting like within a closed unit, as
Right.
in like they're apart from when Mel enters the scene. And I think you'll notice like when Mel is there, like Jude's cruelty is directed towards Mel. Like Mel
Yes.
becomes sort of the yeah, the target there. But I think I'm also trying to make a point about how people behave publicly and privately. I think
Mm,
that people do have there is sort of like a slippage in terms of like masks, behaviors, intentions, what people are willing to share. And I think that we're seeing these characters within at their most intimate, at their most vulnerable. And we're just being allowed like there are no outsiders here. There's no one sort
right.
of watching, so it's almost like what happens. I feel like I wanted to dramatize that distinction between the public and the private and what happens like
Mm,
outside the family home and what happens inside. I think there is definitely this sort of moment when you realize as a child that there are things that private that you're not supposed to share that are like a home privacy truth, whatever. And I think
yeah.
that's what I wanted to play with. And I think that's again with Lorelai and um Rory. I think that they definitely like meet like have to like shift a little when they're in company,
Mm,
like aren't always just living in this like insular world, which is how we see them in their home. But in this situation, like they are most like these characters are in their insular world in Mary's house.
Yes.
And we're just sort of allowed a little window aperture into how they behave when no one's looking.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Which, yeah, and I think there is a privacy, right, that the book promises. It promises that you're kind of like, hey, like you're there, they don't know you're looking.
Mm.
You get to kind of, as the reader, you get to kind of drop into this very insular world of theirs.
Yeah, which is like
It's
super
great.
dramatized with the voice recording. There's so
Mm,
many like the pond, like there are so many moments where we're like allowed access into what people do privately. And
yeah.
yeah, I think that is definitely something I was trying to articulate and think about.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that you definitely did that very, very, like, you did that very well. And you did that in such a way that even it had the Gilmore Girls effect, where even in the midst of the spikiness, you're not like, oh, what?
Mhm.
Like, how could you do this? Well, of course, this character is doing this or saying this, right? Because it's like we've spent so much intimate time with it, even in just 20 pages. And I love that fact. Um, I'm really interested, you mentioned, we could put your editor hat on here for a moment. You mentioned that you've been at Granta for 4 years. Um, and you mentioned, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the name of your friend who doesn't have a US publisher.
Oh, Harriet
Who?
Armstrong.
Who?
Harriet
Harry?
Armstrong.
Harriet Armstrong, who needs to get a US publisher because
She does.
Brody
It's
loves
so
her work. Oh my goodness. See, this is I have this feeling. I have had similar feelings about I want my friend's book to be all over Europe, please, because this would be perfect. This would be
yeah.
like, yeah, I know what you mean. I'm curious though, if you have there are writers like Harriet, or there are writers who have US publishers, whose work is really like exciting to you. You are a debut novelist, you are also an editor, you're helping launch careers. Who would you recommend we read?
Contemporary novelists.
Yes. Early career.
Well, I absolutely it's very different to my work. I love Missouri Williams.
Mm,
Missouri has just published the Laureate with FSG.
mm,
Uh, it's a beautiful, beautiful, devastating, kind of terrifying, apocalyptic book about a university. It's about a city. It's also about love
mm,
and opening yourself up to intimacy. It's
mm.
very strange. I don't know if anyone read the Deloriad, which it's her first novel, also with FSG. But I think she's a very special writer. I think she's sort of like Thomas Bernhard, um,
Oh, awesome.
with many other strange things too. She's great, very special.
Yeah.
Um, I I think Lillian Fishman is extremely talented.
Oh,
I
yes, she's over here. Yes, I love
yeah.
criticism.
Oh, hang on, we asked
Yeah.
me to speak about British authors.
Oh, no, sorry, I was just, like,
Oh,
saying a thing. Yes, please, keep
uh,
going. Keep going.
British. Uh,
Could be either, anybody.
well, my wonderful colleague Aya Valfis van
Yeah.
Wormelig just published her first novel too. It's called Attention
Awesome.
Seeking Behavior. It's
Oh, amazing
out with
title.
Grey Wolf in the US.
Nice.
It's so smart. It's all about lying and lie detection.
Mm.
Um, it's brilliant. Yeah, I guess those three I think are all pretty special. I also love Sophie
Yeah,
Calle,
cool.
and I think she's so much energy.
Yeah. Awesome. I thank you for the recommendations. I think I'm curious to hear too, like, how Um, some of which I know I've read, some which I really want to now I haven't read. Um, how has your editorial work at Granta kind of informed your writing? Because, like, I know that you are, an early 30s writer, debut writer, which would in the literary world, even we both would qualify as young because we're under 40, which is kind of nice. Um, but well, depending on how you look at it, youth can be torturous, as your book is testament to. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, and early career, right? How would you feel that your like trajectory as a writer has been shaped, or your work as an editor has been shaped by what's coming across your desk? Like, it seems like it would be pretty exciting, right, to be working for a publication like Granta and then have like, oh, cool, this stable of writers that you could help lift up or be influenced by.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think so much of, uh, what I read at the magazine, I mean, I work on short form, so
Mm,
I'm editing stories, and I am a novelist, and I guess they're 2 quite different skills,
mm,
but I mean, many of them are, like, super transferable. I guess you sort of when you're editing stories, fiction or essays also, you learn so much about what it is that constitutes like a readable sentence, a sentence that is clear and is telling you something and is enjoyable. And I think you learn what not to do. You learn how to fix other people's. And I think on a sentence level, as an editor, especially because we're very sort of like hands-on editing at Granta, we might do like 4 or 5 rounds, like on a 4,000 word piece. And
mhm.
I think, yeah, you begin to understand what it is that makes a paragraph work. Um, but I don't know. I think that there is something like so exciting and invigorating. Um, Spending time with like early career authors. Maybe, like, seeing them, like, read at an event in London for the first time and then, like,
Mm.
work with them on their first story and then being there and, like, present when their book comes out. That's, always really exciting and really fun, and just feels like you're part of, like, a texture and a community, which is really lovely. But, I mean, I'm really
Yeah.
lucky to, like, be in London and for that to be so accessible. Lots
Yeah,
of
that's
people don't.
fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the I mean, in many ways, you all over there are the originators of the social realism that is influencing has influenced us all so much over here. So how cool to yeah, to really be part of the newest iteration, I think, of that scene. Um, and folks, I know there are those of you in the chat, those of you who have just joined, people are always trickling in. I am talking to Brodie Crellin, their fantastic debut novel, A Sense of Occasion, and their work at Granta is all just great conversation we're having here. If you do have questions for them, though, don't hesitate to post them in the chat. Otherwise, this will go live on Wednesday morning, and then you could talk a little bit more about it there and then. Brodie, I guess this is probably my very, very, very last question for you. I'm wondering, and forgive me if it's a hackneyed one, but I'm just so curious, given all you've kind of, been through so far, debuting, writing, debuting, everything, editing, what, as you approach your next project, like, what is there anything you want to like do differently? Are there any directions you kind of like want to go harder in? Like, where do you see yourself going next?
It's interesting. I have some work coming out, um next year with the Yale review, and
Cool.
I I set myself a limit, and I said there would be no sex in the story.
Really? Oh no.
So
I
I
feel like I'm part of the prude crew that made you so
so my character's
sorry. Your
11.
character.
My characters are
Mhm.
children.
Okay, well, of
There's
course, then, yeah.
there's no sex. But I think which is it was a really exciting limitation because I mean
Yeah,
all ages have like sort of like desires and
sure.
like motivations and I really enjoyed myself thinking about how to move these characters like across the sort of like the chessboard and thinking about like what was motivating them and like what was the conflict and I found that exciting. So I think
Yeah.
that I exploring a little the limitations, of how to
Mm,
write about sex when there is no sex. I have been
mm,
reading Proust,
mm.
recently, for the first time, and I'm in a Proust book club, and I think what I found
That's
so
fabulous.
exciting was how much sex is in that book when there's no sex. like
Absolutely
in
doesn't.
the
Yeah.
in the childhood parts where you can sort
Hmm.
of feel all these desires and all these textures and all this eroticism, but it's sublimated and like you
Hmm.
like moving these different directions. So I guess I'm now trying to think about how to write about sex without ever mentioning sex. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm finding that quite fun.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's such a different, right? Like when I think of what you've written here, you're really, of course, it's a story about adults and about adults and their grief. And when you're shifting into like the child, childhood or adolescent register, it's like the human issues don't vanish, but the point of view, right? Yeah, exactly. The point of view changes, and then of course, I think desire, eros, right? Like desire, wanting something does not it this is what's so interesting to me. It does not always have to be sexualized, and I'm so glad you brought up Proust because, like, you're thinking of the narrator in Cambrai in the very in the very first section. Yeah, it's I mean, totally, all of that is there, and the point is not
And it's like
like,
pre-Freud as well, and it's just
it's
like
pre yes.
full textual, like all of Freud is there in the childhood sections, and it's fascinating, and
It's
I think
fascinating.
yeah, I really enjoyed writing those, sections with the children when the characters are children, because again, like, you can think about all of the sort of, the conflicts, the issues, what's sort of preoccupying these characters as adults, and finding ways to contain that within like a childhood form. So I think I'm finding, yeah, childhood a very like rich and interesting space to think about how we contextualize, think about metabolize desire and what we want and how we go about getting it. Um,
Yeah. This is see, now that you've brought up this Yale review piece, now I have just one last follow-up question, which is we know from a like writing from a child's point of view that want like desires and wants, like again, eros, is not always sexualized. It does not need to be sexualized.
no,
And it is not a function of wanting of human want that it must be sexualized, right? So that's my last question to you, Brody, is like how would you write about or not how would you, but how do you see in your writing and I guess maybe even in other examples of social realism, the eroticized or sexualized want versus the non-sexualized want, like the sexualized eros versus the non-sexualized eros.
I
You
guess
brought
it's
up Freud, so I'm curious now.
I guess there's a difference between what you ask for and what you don't ask for. I think that
Mhm,
then it's sort of like working out the connections between them, and maybe
mhm,
tells you your narrative, like trying to draw the space or fill in the gaps. You might have a child that's like asking for X, but it's clear that it wants Y or something. And I think that you're in as a writer, you're just trying to sort of like um fill in these sort of like these spaces, these like negative areas between what's being said and what goes unsaid, in terms of what is sexualized and like what is just a desire or a want that has nothing to do with eros, maybe.
total yeah, I think too of, like, the adult desire to the mistake of eros sorry, mistaking a want for an erotic thing that is
Mm,
not doesn't have to be erotic. So say, "I really wanna be a painter, but I don't think that was ever possible with me for me, so I decide that I'm going to get into a sexual relationship with someone who's a painter." It's
mm,
like that kind of thing, right? And I think it's so like very, very helpful what you said. Like childhood is not a space where adult sexuality ever should transgress into. And children can have these desires and this sort of like playfulness, like, I want to be a painter, so I'm going to paint today, right? Why
mm,
does that so often get eroticized or sexualized for adults? It has to be a projection, it has to be a this, it has to be a relationship. You can, of course, have that relationship, but I think it's important, right, to distinguish like, oh, this is something like I can just like make the art. I don't have to sleep with the person who makes the art. Your book gets at that too, by the way, in I think a really, really smart way. So
mm.
thank you for doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank
Um,
you for having me. Thank you for reading it.
oh, Yeah, no, I'm so glad to. Thank you so much for coming on. Folks, Brodie Crellin, this is their book. Please purchase this book. It's a great book. It's out from Riverhead. It's a great book. You're gonna have fun reading it. Even if you're an American who's all scandalized, you're gonna love it though. It's deserved scandalization. Okay. Brodie, thank you so much. I hope that,
Yeah.
yeah, please. I will send this to you. You send it out. I'll go ahead and end the live now. If anyone has questions for them, you could find them. Most likely, Brodie, where could people find you? Probably, do you have any kind of a social space they could go to follow your stuff?
Yes, I recently got Instagram. It's just
They
my name.
got Instagram. Okay, it's perfect. Perfect. Yeah,
Easy to
social
find.
media thing.
Yes.
Yes, go find the Brodie Crellin on Instagram, and then you will see all their updates. Thank you very much. Hope to chat
Thank you so
again.
much.
Bye, Brodie.